Okay, now we're starting Unit 3, Chapter 7, Finance. The first part of the unit will cover the simple interest and compound interest in sections 1 and 2. See page 250 in your textbook. Make sure you read through those examples first and the explanations. There's lots of good stuff there. If you have questions about the concepts, let me know. Remember that I do want to see the notes that you take from the videos, the examples from the workbook, not the textbook, but the workbook that I'm doing right now, as well as any classworks that I leave for you to do. This unit really doesn't have too much classwork. I might just put some additional examples, a page for you to try and complete like in a separate document, like a mixed review type thing. Before you have your homework paper that's graded, so that you just have a little more experience on paper. You'll have a lot of really good homework problems as well. A lot of this is just identifying the problem type and the formula to use, plugging into a formula, knowing how to work your calculator and crunch the numbers. And then you'll have a project that you can choose from 2 different types of projects, and you will have access to technology like an online calculator for financial purposes. But we do like to show you out by hand to see how formulas work, and then anywhere you're at, you can usually figure it out pretty quickly. Okay, so on this first page of section 7.1, that's page 75 in your workbook, we have an explanation here about personal finance is critical when we start to balance our expenses. We need to know what we can afford, what we can save. Simple interest is something that you can just figure out really quickly. Just take the rate as a decimal times the amount of money and you'll figure out the interest. If that's happening over time, then we need to add in multiplying by the time in years, or it should match what the units are. Usually it's years. So if something is for a certain amount of months and it was like 4 months, you'd have to do 4 divided by 12 to figure that out. This first page, though, just has you look at simple one-time interest. A lot of it you're probably familiar with. Interest equals the principal. The principal is notated with a subscript of a 0. That doesn't mean times 0 or anything. That just means P sub 0. And what that tells us is that's the initial amount of money that we're putting in. And then that is times the rate. And what this indicates here, this capital A, is the end amount, the principal plus interest. And how we get this here is A, this is a factored form, A is the money that you put in plus the interest earned. And then we know the interest earned is this, right? P sub 0, or P initial, or sometimes we say P naught, times R. So we could actually write it, we could replace interest with, oops, that should be an R, P sub 0 times R, or I might just call it principal. And then I just factor out the principal. And that's where this formula came from, in case you were wondering that. So let's look at example 7.1. And again, so you should be either stopping the video, writing this up and checking, or doing it along with me as notes. And I do want that submitted. I want just about everything from the workbook submitted. If you're missing 1 or 2 out of a bunch of problems, I'm not going to dock you points, but after that, it will go down. So I do not want just any classworks that I say. Actually, these are all going to be examples that you should turn in and submit. Now we'll see in this problem how that over time we do need to take that into consideration. Suppose a city is building a new children's park and issues bonds to raise the money to build it. Sally obtains a $1,000 bond that pays 3.5% interest annually and matures in 6 years. So for the annual interest after 1 year, we can just use the formula that we had above. So it's just asking about interest, not the end amount. So we would do I equals the principal that she put in, or what the bond is worth, is $1,000. And 3.5% interest, remember we worked in a prior unit, we need to just move 2 places left, so that'll be 0.035. So this should look familiar to you. Amount equals percent times base. And so when we calculate that out, we should just get $35. Okay, so now the next question is, what is the total interest Sally will earn when the bond matures in 6 years? Now this is where you could pause and try that and figure it out. A lot of these problems you should have seen some really good examples in the textbook. You could even watch those videos to get some ideas on, if you're stuck on how to do things, and then try these more as classwork and then check them against the videos. So go ahead and see if you can figure out B and C as classwork, and then check back and just do it right along with me. Okay, so here are the answers to the classwork that I left for you. $210 interest earned over the 6 years, and add that to the principal for part C, and you'll get $1,210 as the end amount A. Okay, so now you can see where we need to factor in the time depending on what the problem says. So that's just what this says up here. So a better formula, just simple interest over time, even if it were just 1 year or something, we can just put T as 1. But we really need to take that into account. So the same thing here, we have interest equals the principal times the rate times the time, and the units should match, and usually it's years. So you'll see how that works out in the examples. So, and again, this is the factored form, and what the breakdown is, we have A equals P sub 0, the interest plus, or the principal plus the interest. And interest could be written as P sub 0 RT. You could factor out the P sub 0 and just write it like this. Amount equals principal times quantity, 1 plus RT. So we do need to be careful to follow our order of operations, and I'll show you how to keep things in your calculator. There's been a lot of questions about rounding, so you don't want to round within the problem at all if you can help it. You want to keep everything in your calculator and only round at the end, and this is money problem, so generally it's going to be to 2 places after the decimal to the hundredths, because we'll have dollars and cents. Sometimes, though, you'll be asked to round to the nearest dollar, for instance, or when you're doing percents, it may vary. So now let's look at these couple of problems here. And this one, I actually think you could figure out quite nicely, probably both of these based on the examples I did earlier. So I am going to encourage you to just stop the video and try them on your own and then check back, but I'll go through them quickly as well. So for this problem, we have Uncle Moneybags deposits $300 in an account earning a 5% annual interest rate. How much will Uncle Moneybags have in the account in 10 years? So this is telling us that that's what it is over 1 year. He deposits $300 initially, so that's our P sub 0. So we do have to figure out what kind of problem it is. It doesn't say anything about that it's compounded or that he's making deposits every year, for instance. It's just a one-time lump sum, and there's no compound interest, which we'll see further along, and hopefully you've read about that's when you're earning interest on your interest. So this one is just a straightforward simple interest problem. We could do it in 2 steps. Amount equals principal plus interest, and we would write it out like this because we're trying to find the end amount. How much will he have after 10 years? And we know that the initial value is 300. We know that I can be written as principal times the rate, which would be 0.05. Don't forget to put it in as a decimal. And then the time is in years as 10. So we would want to do this part first. We multiply before we add. You got to make sure we're not just going 300 plus 300. That will not work out too well for us. So we have 300 plus all this will come out to be 150. And so in total, the amount is $450. And you do want to write in a sentence $450. You could just say he will have $450, something like that, and just mark your answer clearly. I do also want to show you just quickly how you could do it using the other form of the formula, just so it's all rolled together. It suits its purpose. It can be a lot quicker in the long run. So we would have, if we're trying to find A, not just I anyway, so we'll just plug everything in. 300 times the 1 plus the rate is 0.05 times the 10. So you can go ahead and try this with me. And we'll get 1.5 here because this will come out to be 0.5. We got to multiply before we add. And then we get the same exact answer. And again, a lot of times I'm writing out more steps than you need, but if you're ever not sure, more is better than less, especially on a paper quiz or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to have you do this next one. You're solving for rate this time, so be careful how you plug things in. I'll have you try it, and then I'll just write it out. I'm not going to do it all as a video, but I will tell you it's only a 1-month loan, and we do need to have units match. So if this is an annual interest rate, we need to have our time in years, so it would be 1 out of 12. So be careful how you type things into your calculator. So I'm going to actually have you pause the video, see if you can plug in and just use that interest formula. So you'll be using this one. So we have all the pieces we need except the rate is what we're trying to find. And then I'll show you how I typed it into my calculator after I write it out. So I'm hoping you can see what I'm typing in on the calculator, but I plugged in 30 for the interest that's charged, 500 for the principal, 1/12 for the time, as we talked about before, and rate is what I'm finding, and I'll find it as a decimal and then convert to percent. So when I do this, I want to I can just start here and do 500 times 1/12, or just really divided by 12. And I get a number that doesn't terminate. Even though it looks like it stops here, that's just because the calculator can't hold it. So we really are, it's kind of rounding. But we want to leave that in our calculator, but we need to divide both sides by that number. So instead of stopping it and retyping it, you're just going to put in 30. Don't hit any equals or anything like that. Just type in 30. Okay, I'm going to push this up. And then you're going to hit this key here, second answer. And what that does is it, oops, let me get rid of that. 30 divided by the second answer. I have to hit the divided first. 30 divided by, and then hit that second key and the answer key. Then hit enter. And you should get 0.72. So what that key does, it holds the previous answer. If you don't have a key like that or something, then just what you should do is you can write out, if you go out 6 decimal places, you won't get that much rounding error. Your book does show you what rounding error does to a problem and how your result can change. So do take a look at that. And here is the answer. These 3 dots mean therefore. The annual interest rate is 72%. Okay, so that is it for the simple interest. So we'll take a look at compound interest, and do make sure you read about that in your book. And while it's a good idea to take notes out of your textbook, I know a lot of you like to do that, but don't submit those with your workbook things. Just keep them separate. But I do want everything from the workbook, so make sure you take a picture or scan this in. Thanks.